In 1970, a nursing student received a vintage Raggedy Ann doll as a birthday gift. Within 3 weeks, it was moving on its own. Within 6 weeks, it left 7 bloody scratch marks on a man's chest. When paranormal investigators finally locked it away, they discovered it wasn't possessed by a ghost. It was something demonic, pretending to be a little girl. This is the true story of Annabelle. And here's what makes it even more disturbing. Johnny Gruelle, the man who created the Raggedy Ann doll, died mysteriously just weeks after winning a bitter legal battle over it. 50 years later, the man who transported Annabelle across the country also died suddenly under suspicious circumstances. This doll has a pattern, and what happened last year proves its story is far from over. To understand how a simple children's toy became one of the most feared objects in the world, we need to go back to where it all began. Indianapolis, Indiana, 1915.
If you want to escape my curse, subscribe to the channel.
Johnny Gruelle was a successful cartoonist, drawing comic strips for major newspapers. He had a wife, a career, and a 14-year-old daughter named Marcella. Life was good, until it wasn't. Marcella received a smallpox vaccination. This was long before anyone monitored vaccine safety properly. Something went wrong. The girl became gravely ill, her condition deteriorating rapidly. Doctors couldn't help her. All Johnny could do was sit by her bedside and try to keep her spirits up. He found an old rag doll in the attic. It had button eyes and no other features. Johnny added red yarn for hair, drew a smile and a triangular nose. He named it Raggedy and then used it to tell his daughter stories every night. For a few precious months, those stories made Marcella forget about the pain. But in November 1915, Marcella died. Johnny was devastated. He channeled his grief into a project, writing a series of children's books featuring Raggedy Ann at the center. He patented the doll design and sold it to manufacturers. Soon, Raggedy Ann dolls were in homes across America, bringing joy to thousands of children. Johnny poured everything into the Raggedy Ann brand. But other companies started making knockoff versions, stealing his design. In 1938, he finally won a major lawsuit that gave him full control over the Raggedy Ann name. He'd fought for years to protect his creation. 3 weeks later, Johnny Gruelle died suddenly of heart failure. He was only 57 years old. No prior heart problems. No warning signs. Just gone. Some people said it was the stress of the lawsuit. Others whispered something darker, that maybe channeling his grief into a doll, monetizing his daughter's suffering, had consequences he didn't foresee. But Johnny's death was just the beginning of Raggedy Ann's dark history. Fast forward to May 1953, Portland, Maine, a quiet residential neighborhood. Police received a call about a disturbance at an apartment. When they arrived, they found a scene that would haunt them for years. Charlotte Adams, age 40, and her 12-year-old daughter Caroline were dead. Their throats had been slashed. Blood covered the walls. The medical examiner noted defensive wounds on both victims, suggesting they'd fought desperately for their lives. The suspect was Douglas Adams, the husband and father. He turned himself in immediately, showing no emotion, no remorse. When police questioned him, his answers were chilling. Douglas had no history of violence, no criminal record, no mental illness, no financial problems, no marital issues, nothing that would explain why he'd brutally murder his own family. When asked why he did it, he gave a cryptic response. Legally, I am guilty, but morally, that's a different story. He refused to elaborate. All he would say is that he'd been planning it for 3 days but had no idea why he felt compelled to do it. It was as if something had planted the idea in his mind and he couldn't resist. Police searched the crime scene thoroughly, documenting every detail. And that's when they noticed something odd. In the same room where 12-year-old Caroline's body was found, there was a Raggedy Ann doll sitting in a chair. The doll hadn't been knocked over during the struggle. It hadn't been damaged or bloodied. It was positioned carefully, almost deliberately, just a few feet from the victim, as if it had been watching. Newspapers reported the detail, but nobody made much of it at the time. It was just a toy. Coincidence. But looking back now, knowing what we know about Annabelle, that 1953 crime scene takes on a much more sinister meaning. Because 17 years later, another Raggedy Ann doll would be linked to violent attacks. And this time, the investigators wouldn't dismiss it as coincidence. Hartford, Connecticut, 1970. Donna Jennings was 28 years old, working her way through nursing school. She shared an apartment with her roommate Angie Tappleton, also a nursing student. Both women worked long shifts at local hospitals, coming home exhausted. For Donna's birthday, her mother gave her a gift, a vintage Raggedy Ann doll, the kind you'd find in an antique shop. It was old but well-preserved, with its signature red yarn hair and button eyes. Donna thought it was charming. She placed it on her bed. Within days, strange things started happening. Cold drafts in rooms with closed windows. Shuffling sounds at night when both women were home. Objects moving from where they'd been left. At first, they attributed it to stress, exhaustion, working double shifts. Then the notes appeared. Handwritten messages on scraps of parchment paper, scattered around the apartment. Childish handwriting. The notes said things like, "Help us and help Lou." Lou was Angie's fiancé, Lou Carlo. He'd visit the apartment regularly. The notes mentioning him by name were deeply unsettling. Donna and Angie searched the entire apartment for parchment paper. They didn't own any. They asked neighbors if someone was playing a prank. Nobody knew anything about it. And the doll kept moving. They'd leave it on Donna's bed in the morning. Come home to find it sitting in a chair in the living room. Sometimes its arms would be crossed. Sometimes its legs would be positioned differently. Once they found it in the hallway, propped against a wall. Both Donna and Angie were rational, scientifically minded people. They tried to find logical explanations. Maybe they were misremembering where they'd left the doll. Maybe vibrations from the building settling were moving it. Maybe they were both so exhausted they were experiencing shared hallucinations. But then Lou's nightmares started. Lou had never liked the doll. From the moment he saw it, something about it made him uncomfortable. He told Angie it gave him a bad feeling, that she and Donna should get rid of it. They laughed it off. It was just a toy. One night, Lou stayed over at the apartment. He woke suddenly in the middle of the night, gasping for air, drenched in sweat. He told the women he'd had the most vivid, terrifying nightmare of his life. In the dream, the Raggedy Ann doll was strangling him. Its soft cloth hands were wrapped around his throat, squeezing tighter and tighter. He couldn't breathe, couldn't scream, couldn't fight back. The doll's stitched-on smile never changed as it choked the life out of him. Donna and Angie tried to comfort him. It was just a nightmare, they said. Stress. Too much coffee. Lou wanted to believe them, but the nightmare came back the next night. And the night after that. A few days later, Lou was alone in the apartment. He heard noises coming from Donna's bedroom. Thinking maybe an intruder had broken in, he cautiously opened the door. The room was empty, except for the doll, which had fallen into a corner on the floor. Lou stepped closer to pick it up, and that's when he felt it. A sudden, searing pain across his chest. He stumbled backward, lifted his shirt, and saw 7 deep scratch marks running across his chest. Claw-like gouges that had drawn blood. The cuts had appeared instantly, right in front of his eyes, with nothing touching him. That was enough. The 3 of them decided they needed professional help. They contacted a medium, someone who claimed to communicate with spirits. The medium agreed to come to the apartment and conduct a seance. During the seance, the medium made contact with what she claimed was a spirit. The spirit identified itself as Annabelle Higgins, a 7-year-old girl who had died on the property years before the apartment building was constructed. According to the spirit, she used to play in the fields where the building now stood. The spirit said she was lonely, She'd been moving the doll around, leaving notes, trying to get Donna and Angie's attention. She didn't want to hurt anyone. She just wanted someone to play with. Donna and Angie felt terrible. They were nurses. They helped people. Here was a lonely child's spirit reaching out to them. So they made a decision that would change everything. They gave the spirit permission to stay. They told Annabelle she could remain in the apartment, that they'd be her friends. They started treating the doll like it was a living child. They bought it gifts, jewelry. They'd set it at the table during meals. At night, they'd tuck it into bed. But Lou's nightmares got worse. Every single night, he'd dream of the doll strangling him. And the physical attacks continued. More scratches appeared on his body, always when he was near the doll. Finally, they contacted a priest. The Episcopal priest listened to their story and immediately knew this was beyond his expertise. He made a phone call to Ed and Lorraine Warren, a husband and wife team of paranormal investigators based in Connecticut. Ed and Lorraine Warren had been investigating supernatural occurrences for decades. Ed was a demonologist, studying dark entities and their behaviors. Lorraine claimed to be clairvoyant, able to sense spiritual presences. Together, they'd worked on hundreds of cases. When they arrived at the apartment and heard the full story, their conclusion was immediate and grim. There was no Annabelle Higgins. There never had been a 7-year-old girl who died on the property. The medium had been communicating with something that was lying. Ed explained it to Donna, Angie, and Lou like this. Demons don't possess objects. They possess people. The doll was being used as a conduit, a tool. The entity had been pretending to be a lonely child to gain their trust and sympathy. By inviting it to stay, by treating the doll like it was alive, they'd essentially given this entity permission to attach itself to them. It had been working its way closer, testing boundaries, growing stronger. The scratches on Lou were just the beginning. If they'd waited much longer, someone could have been seriously hurt or worse. Ed and Lorraine knew they had to remove the doll immediately. They placed it carefully in a bag and Ed drove it back to their home in Monroe, Connecticut. But even during the drive, the entity wasn't finished. Ed later reported that the car's brakes failed multiple times on the highway. The power steering gave out on sharp turns. They nearly crashed twice. Finally, Ed pulled over to the side of the road, took out a vial of holy water he always carried, and blessed the doll right there on the shoulder of the highway. Only then did the car start functioning normally again. Back at the Warrens' home, they knew they couldn't simply destroy the doll. If they did, they'd only destroy the vessel. The entity would be released, free to attach itself to something or someone else. The only solution was containment. They had a special glass case constructed. The case was blessed by a Catholic priest, surrounded by religious artifacts, holy relics, blessed metals. They placed the doll inside and locked it. A sign was attached to the case with a clear warning. Positively, do not open. And that's where the doll stayed. In the basement of the Warrens' home, which over the years accumulated hundreds of other cursed objects and became known as the Warren Occult Museum. For the next several years, the doll remained largely unknown to the general public. The Warrens would mention it occasionally during lectures, but it was just one case among hundreds. That changed in 1980 when a writer named Gerald Brittle published a comprehensive biography of the Warrens called The Demonologist. The book included detailed accounts of their most disturbing cases, including the full story of Annabelle. When people read about the possessed doll, the attacks, the demonic deception, they were fascinated and terrified. Word spread. People started requesting tours of the Warren Occult Museum specifically to see Annabelle. Ed and Lorraine allowed visitors, but they had strict rules. Do not touch the glass case. Do not mock the doll. Do not open the case under any circumstances. They warned that the entity inside was still active, still dangerous, still waiting for an opportunity. Most visitors respected the rules. But there's one story the Warrens told repeatedly over the years, a cautionary tale about what happens when you don't take the warning seriously. A young couple came to visit the museum. The boyfriend was a skeptic, the kind of person who thought the whole thing was ridiculous. He stood in front of Annabelle's case, banging on the glass, taunting the doll. He said, "If you're so powerful, prove it. Do something to me right now." Ed Warren asked him to leave immediately. The young man and his girlfriend got on his motorcycle and drove away. According to the Warrens, less than 3 hours later, the young man lost control of the motorcycle and crashed head-on into a tree. He died instantly. His girlfriend survived but spent over a year in the hospital. When she was finally able to speak to investigators, she said that right before the crash, her boyfriend had been laughing about the doll, saying it was all fake, that nothing was going to happen. Now, I've tried to verify this story. I can't find any public record of the crash. No police report. No news coverage. But the Warrens told this story for decades, and it became part of Annabelle's legend. Whether it actually happened or not, it served a purpose. It made people afraid. And fear, as we're about to see, has power. In 2006, Ed Warren died of heart failure at age 79. Just like Johnny Gruelle, the creator of the Raggedy Ann doll. Heart failure. Sudden and unexpected. Lorraine continued working well into her 80s, still investigating cases, still giving lectures about demonology and the paranormal. But in April 2019, at age 92, Lorraine Warren passed away. With both Ed and Lorraine gone, control of the Warren Occult Museum passed to their daughter Judy Warren and her husband Tony Spera. Tony had worked alongside the Warrens for decades as a paranormal investigator himself. He knew the protocols, the prayers, the precautions. But there was a problem. The museum was located in a residential neighborhood in Monroe, Connecticut. And decades of tourists, curiosity seekers, and paranormal enthusiasts had turned the quiet street into a nightmare for the neighbors. Cars blocking driveways, strangers walking around at all hours, tour groups disrupting the peace. The neighbors had had enough. They filed complaints with the local government. And in 2019, shortly after Lorraine's death, the town shut down the Warren Occult Museum, citing zoning violations. The artifacts were still there. Annabelle was still locked in her case in the basement of the house. But the public could no longer visit. The museum was closed indefinitely. And that's when something happened that would thrust Annabelle back into the global spotlight. Hollywood came calling. In 2013, director James Wan released a movie called The Conjuring. It was based on one of the Warrens' most famous cases, the Perron family haunting. But the movie opened with a different case entirely, the Annabelle doll. The opening scene showed two nurses describing their terrifying experiences with a possessed doll to Ed and Lorraine Warren. It was a setup for the main story, but audiences couldn't stop talking about the doll. They wanted to know more. The Conjuring was a massive success, making over $300 million worldwide. Warner Brothers immediately greenlit a spin-off focused entirely on Annabelle. But there was a legal problem. The real Annabelle was a Raggedy Ann doll. Raggedy Ann is a trademarked brand owned by Hasbro. There was no way Hasbro would allow their beloved children's toy to be portrayed as a demonic vessel in a horror movie. It would destroy the brand. So director James Wan and his team completely redesigned Annabelle. They created a porcelain doll with a cracked face, lifeless glass eyes, blood-red lips, and a Victorian-era dress. It looked nothing like the real Annabelle, but it was far more visually terrifying. The Annabelle movie was released in 2014 and made $250 million. Prequel, Annabelle Creation, came out in 2017. Another sequel, Annabelle Comes Home, in 2019. The franchise exploded. Annabelle became one of the most recognizable figures in modern horror cinema. Merchandise, Halloween costumes, fan art, everything. The porcelain doll version was everywhere. But this created an interesting side effect. The more famous the movie version became, the more people wanted to see the real thing. The actual Raggedy Ann doll locked away in the Warren Museum. But the museum was closed. So people started making pilgrimages to the house, taking photos from the street, leaving notes and gifts on the porch. And then, in August 2020, something happened that sent the internet into an absolute frenzy. A rumor started spreading on social media. People claimed that Annabelle had escaped from the Warren Museum. The rumor originated from a mistranslation in Chinese media. An actress named Annabelle Wallis, who'd starred in one of the Annabelle films, gave an interview about running alongside Tom Cruise in a different movie. But the translation changed running to escaped. Suddenly, millions of people believed the doll had broken free from its case. And this was August 2020, the height of the COVID pandemic. Wildfires in Australia, murder hornets, locust swarms, global chaos. People were already convinced the world was ending. And now there were reports that a demonic doll was loose. Twitter exploded. TikTok went wild. Conspiracy theories spread faster than the virus. People genuinely believed Annabelle was responsible for everything going wrong in 2020. Tony Spera had to film a video inside the closed museum, showing that Annabelle was still safely locked in her case. But the damage was done. The rumor had gone viral. Millions of views, international news coverage, and Tony Spera realized something. There was massive public demand to see this doll. So he made a controversial decision that would change everything. In 2021, Tony announced that Annabelle would go on tour. For the first time since the museum closed, people could pay to see the real doll in person at paranormal conventions across the United States. The announcement was met with immediate backlash. Critics argued that Ed and Lorraine had strict rules. The doll was never supposed to leave the museum. It was never supposed to be moved. And it certainly wasn't supposed to be displayed in random hotel conference rooms. But Tony insisted that proper precautions were being taken. The doll would remain in a specially constructed travel case, blessed regularly by priests. Prayers would be said before and after each event. It would be safe. The tours were called Devils on the Run, and they were wildly successful. Hundreds of people showed up at each location, paying admission to stand in the same room as Annabelle, to take photos, to feel whatever energy or presence might be emanating from the case. One of the people responsible for transporting and setting up Annabelle's case was a man named Dan Rivera. Dan was a longtime member of the New England Society for Psychic Research, the organization founded by Lorraine Warren. He'd worked with the Warrens for years, understood the protocols, knew how to handle cursed objects safely. Dan was the one who built Annabelle's travel case, reinforced with blessed materials and religious protection. He was the one who moved the doll from location to location, who opened and closed the case, who made sure everything was secure. Over the years, Dan told stories about strange things that happened whenever he transported Annabelle. Car accidents that he walked away from without a scratch. Vehicles breaking down inexplicably. Bad luck that seemed to follow him after every move. But he kept doing it because he believed in the work. He believed people needed to see proof that evil exists, that the spiritual world is real. In July 2024, the Devils on the Run tour arrived in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. The event was scheduled for July 11th through July 13th. Hundreds of tickets had been sold. Everything was set up. On the last day, July 13th, Dan told his colleagues he wasn't feeling well. He decided to go back to his hotel room to rest. When the team returned later that day, they found him unresponsive. Dan Rivera was dead. Age 54. No prior health issues. No warning signs. Local police investigated. They found nothing suspicious at the scene. No signs of foul play. The official cause of death was listed as natural causes. But natural causes for a healthy 54-year-old man dying suddenly in a hotel room raised a lot of questions. The paranormal community immediately connected his death to the doll. People pointed out that Dan had been the one handling Annabelle more than anyone else in recent years, opening the case, moving it from state to state. Some claimed he'd been targeted by the entity inside the doll. Others argued it was karmic punishment for violating Ed and Lorraine's rules, for taking the doll on tour when it should have remained locked away. Dan's family and friends were devastated, and they were also angry, because while they were grieving, the internet was filled with people making jokes, blaming the doll, turning Dan's death into paranormal entertainment. But the tour didn't stop. If anything, Dan's death made people more interested, more curious, more convinced that Annabelle was real and dangerous. And then, in August 2025, something happened that nobody saw coming. Comedian Matt Rife, known for his stand-up comedy and massive social media following, made an announcement. He and his friend Elton Castee had purchased the Warren home in Monroe, Connecticut. They now had legal guardianship of all 750 cursed objects in the Warren Occult Museum, including Annabelle. Their plan? Turn the house into an Airbnb. Allow paying guests to book overnight stays, to investigate the house and the artifacts, to spend the night surrounded by objects that Ed and Lorraine Warren had deemed too dangerous for public exposure. The announcement was met with shock, outrage, and fascination. Some people thought it was brilliant, a way to preserve the Warren legacy and allow more people to experience it. Others thought it was reckless, irresponsible, potentially deadly. But the announcement also exposed something the public hadn't known. There was a family feud. Ed and Lorraine Warren's grandson, Chris McKinnell, released a statement on social media. He said he had no involvement in the sale and didn't support it. He accused Tony Spera, his stepfather, of treating the Warren legacy like a brand, like entertainment, instead of respecting the sacred work his grandparents had dedicated their lives to. Chris argued that Ed and Lorraine had helped people suffering from real paranormal experiences. They weren't showmen. They weren't trying to get famous or rich. They were trying to protect people from genuine spiritual dangers. And now, Chris claimed, their life's work was being turned into a tourist attraction, an Airbnb experience with no regard for the potential consequences. Tony Spera responded that the sale had been planned for months, long before Dan Rivera's death. He insisted that Matt Rife and Elton Castee understood the responsibility they were taking on, that proper spiritual protections would remain in place. But the question that nobody could answer was this: can you really contain evil behind glass? Can you charge people admission to stand near a demonic object and expect nothing to happen? Can you turn a cursed artifact into an Airbnb attraction without consequences? Because here's the undeniable pattern. Johnny Gruelle, the man who created the Raggedy Ann doll, died suddenly after years of fighting to control it. Ed Warren, who locked Annabelle away, died of heart failure. Dan Rivera, who transported the doll for years, died suddenly at 54. And now, the doll is more accessible to the public than it's ever been. More people touching the case. More people mocking it. More people treating it like entertainment instead of a genuine spiritual threat. So let me ask you, do you believe a doll can be possessed? Do you think an object can carry a curse? Or is this all just brilliant storytelling? A legend that's been carefully crafted and monetized for over 50 years? I can't answer that for you, but I can tell you this. Every single person who's owned that doll, from Donna and Angie in 1970 to the investigators today, every single one of them has said the same thing. There's something wrong with it. Something that watches. Something that waits. Something that can't be explained by science or logic or rational thought. Whether you believe in the paranormal or not, the pattern is undeniable. People who get too close to Annabelle, who mock her, who violate the rules, tend to experience consequences. Johnny Gruelle fought for his creation and died weeks later. Douglas Adams inexplicably murdered his family with a Raggedy Ann doll watching. Lou was attacked repeatedly in his own home. The young man who taunted the doll allegedly died in a motorcycle crash. Ed Warren died of heart failure. Dan Rivera died suddenly while transporting it. And now, the Warrens' grandson is warning the world that opening this house to the public might be the biggest mistake anyone's ever made. The Airbnb is set to open in summer 2026. Reservations are already being taken. People are already booking nights in a house with 750 cursed objects. Will something happen? Will there be more deaths? More accidents? More unexplained tragedies? Or will it all be fine? Just another tourist attraction with a scary backstory? Time will tell. But if you ever find yourself standing in front of that glass case, staring into those button eyes, remember the warning that's been there for over 50 years. Positively do not open, because some doors once opened can never be closed again. And some things once invited in never leave. This is Annabelle's story, a doll created in grief, found at crime scenes, used by something demonic, locked away by investigators who knew better, and now more accessible than ever before. The question isn't whether you believe it's haunted. The question is whether you're willing to find out.